Pete Barbutti has put down his broom long enough to spend a little time with us this morning. Good morning, Pete.
Morning, Ken. How are you today?
I'm fine. How you doing?
Very fine. Snowing there yet?
I'll tell you, we had every kind of temperature you could imagine for the last week or so. We practically broke temperatures on the low end of the thermometer and then on the high end later on. So.
Well, you know, you're in the part of the country where God has the most fun with the weather.
Yeah, if you don't like it, just stick around for about 5 minutes.
Right.
It's bound to change. How you been?
Very fine, thank you.
Good. You're a very funny man and also a decent musician, too.
Yeah, that's a good description of it. Just decent.
In fact, you were, a musician before you really decided to do funny stuff?
Yeah, I started playing the accordion back in Pennsylvania, in the coal regions of Pennsylvania, and then switched to piano. That's sort of a natural transition. And when I was in high school, played percussion with the band back there and ended up playing with the symphony. And so I was into it seriously for a lot of years.
For some reason, I guess you'd have to dabble in percussion because you always figure it's the drummers who always, the guys that cut up.
Guy in the band, right.
Yeah.
Something about him, being the only one, maybe.
And they're always getting yelled at, too. I was in high school band. And the band instructor would always say, "You're too loud, cut it down." Well, you pay attention to me. You're not the one that sets the speed.
That's right, always. Well, it's funny, too, because in the era I grew up with, all drummers lived with the stigma of being too loud. Your whole life people were saying, too much drums, man. Keep the drums down. Don't play drum solos. Stop it. You know, too much drums. And now we're into a rock era where you go in to work a job and you almost can't hear the drummer, and he's got microphones on every drum and every cymbal. So times changed, Ken.
I guess that's true. Now they have guitars, too, that kind of sound like almost any instrument you can imagine.
Well, that's what I mean. You can't hear the drummer anymore. You got 6,000 watts of amplification.
Yeah.
From the organ and the synthesizer and the keyboards and the guitars and the bass, and so you can't hear the drummer anymore, so it's come a complete circle.
I'm glad somebody has taken a serious look at music. And by the way, I wanted to ask you, do you play the piano with your nose when you have a cold?
You can't. Very serious handicap. I think I'm the only piano player in the world who is handicapped by a running nose.
Yeah, you heard about playing by ear. Pete Barbutti does it like that.
Yeah, this is a little bit weirder.
Do you have backup musicians when you play? Are you?
Yeah, I always use a group behind me. I've worked a couple of dates when I haven't, but usually I certainly prefer to have musicians behind me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice to know you have a little protection.
Yeah, in case the audience turns hostile and comes towards the stage.
Yeah. It's fun to watch you work because you have a kind of a different approach to comedy.
Yeah, if anybody can describe it, I think it's probably best described as seeing the world through the eyes of a sort of an offbeat bebop musician.
Uh-huh.
So that's sort of like the direction, at least, from which my humor comes.
Isn't that something, though? Every good comedian has a pretty good idea what they do. Some people look at it through... in fact, we talked with Bob Newhart not long ago, and he said that he just kind of looks at it as the world is going crazy around him, and he's one guy that's trying to keep it sane and try to pull both ends together.
Yeah, and he's excellent, too. Bob's a wonderful... For those who've never seen him work in concert, or in a club or something, he's absolutely wonderful. He's one of the few people who can handle both ends, the television and the stand-up end, too. He's very special.
Pete, be honest with me now. Have you ever had those nights when the comedy doesn't work? I imagine back in the early days of your career, maybe that was the case.
Sure. In fact, it was probably all of the nights, and then it diminished down to most of the nights, then to half the nights, to some of the nights.
But at least you could go back to the piano and try to say that you were a straight musician then, I suppose.
Yeah, not so much anymore, but in those days you could. And in fact, it was a big help in those days because you get into a situation where nobody knew you or heard of you, and there was a problem with an acceptability factor with the audience. But as soon as you sit down and play something serious on the piano, then all of a sudden it sort of changes their attitude. I think their feeling is, well, gee, if he can do that, and he's doing this other thing, he must know what he's doing.
Yeah, like a Victor Borge, certainly.
Yeah.
You see him do the comedy, and then you say play the piano. When he's playing the piano, then you want to have him do more comedy.
Yeah, but he's excellent too. He's wonderful. If you've never seen him work, he's for people who've just seen him on television, he's excellent too.
Yeah. Well, you are too. I've not seen you except on TV. I want to catch your act live, and we have an opportunity. In fact, this weekend at Pheasant Run Playhouse up in St. Charles, Illinois.
Right.
In fact, you may have been in there and out of there from time to time.
This is my first time at Pheasant Run.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think I've worked everywhere else in the Chicago area.
Doggone, I'm trying to remember where in the world. Maybe it would have been Maryville, Indiana, where we would have talked to you, because I've talked to you before.
Could be.
And
I've certainly been everywhere, Ken.
It certainly was because of a date that I happened to see you in the area, and I thought, boy, this is a great opportunity to talk to you again because we had a delightful time.
Oh, good.
Your show, I imagine, varies pretty much night to night, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's different all the time, and I keep it that way because it keeps me interested in it as well as the audience.
Uh-huh. Do you, we're talking about unusual approaches to comedy, and until you're accepted, people will have a hard time sometimes trying to understand where you're going.
Yeah.
You're familiar with Stephen Wright, aren't you?
Yeah.
I was wondering how Stephen Wright ever got anybody's attention the first time he walked out on stage, because he's so low.
Yeah, well, I think it was a big help having the comedy club circuit around today, and Steve's done a bunch of those places, and I think that sort of sets a tone. You get a chance to work as the third act on the bill for enough time until you can establish that character confidently in your own head. Because comedy's kind of like swimming. When you're a kid and you can't swim, somebody throws you in the water and you sink. And they tell you the only way you can float is to keep kicking and keep using your arms. And then after you know how to swim, it's funny, you can be in the same water and almost not move at all and float. So
it helps when you get out of the sack, though, doesn't it?
Well, a little bit, and get the concrete off. But it's a funny thing, it's like a 99% confidence, and the audience feels that when you walk out. I'm sure when Steven started off, like all of us, you don't have that confidence out front.
Yeah.
The audience can sense that, so it's even more difficult.
Well, I was just trying to do... I don't think he plays any instrument or anything where he could get attention, but I can imagine him in a noisy bar where you can't even get any people to stop talking.
Yeah, that happens. That happens. The era I came up with was all nightclubs, and there were a bunch of them in every city and every state in the country, and a lot of them were in rough areas, Cal City, Illinois, and places like that.
Mm-hmm.
Gary, Indiana, steel towns, places like that, Pittsburgh and Cleveland. So you had rough audiences because you had rough people who went to the clubs in those times. But
yeah. They go to see a comedian and maybe criticize you for your music. Who knows?
Yeah, or throw a beer bottle at you or something.
You, well, I don't know. We talked a while back. I don't remember when it was, maybe a year or two ago. Who knows? But we talked about a couple of stories that went over extremely well. In fact, they were stories I think you told on The Tonight Show from time to time.
That's where they started, right?
But they're the stories that people love to hear. One was about the pig with the wooden leg, which is...
Wooden leg, the day of infamy when I told that.
Oh, it's a classic story.
Yeah, it went all over the world in about 7 minutes.
In fact, we wound up... I remember what we did. We reran the interview we had at that time because people wanted to hear the story with the pig with the wooden leg. So you wound up being on station at least twice, as I recall.
See that? That's funny. After I told that, for about the following 48 hours, I got phone calls from all over the country from people, that I had known, and they said, that was the greatest joke I ever heard, and they carried on. And then for about the next 3 weeks, every time I was in an airport, I'd have people come up to me, businessmen, and say, chairman of the board of this company, and I spoke at my meeting last week, and I used your pig joke, and it really scored, and I want to thank you. And then for about the next month, I had people coming up to me saying, hey, I heard a great joke, I got to tell you this. And they'd tell me the joke back, my own joke. And then for a while, I couldn't even use it because it was so rampant. Everybody in the world had heard it,
Yeah.
And
people...
now it's back in the act again because people actually want to hear it again, and I've embellished it a little and so forth. But it's funny how a joke like that would have... In fact, about 2 weeks after I did it on the Carson show, somebody else came on and tried to tell it.
Is that right?
Yeah, somebody had told somebody else.
Boy, that takes either tremendous stupidity or an awful lot of guts.
So it was, maybe not stupidity, but ignorance. They didn't know that the joke had been told on the show. Someone had told it to them at a party or something.
Yeah.
And the guy got about 4 lines in, and Carson and Ed McMahon and the entire band just jumped on the poor guy. I felt sorry for him. Some actor, who was not terribly aware of the whole world.
It sounds crazy. That joke is almost perfect because you really don't know where it's going.
Exactly. And it has everything. It has an animal in it, which is not a vicious animal. And it has pathos. It has a little bit of everything. It has compassion and everything.
Mm-hmm. So many times you see a joke coming. The classic one about Roy Rogers and Dale Evans with his new boots.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And you could see where somebody got an idea and then just backed up and embellished it. But the pig with the wooden leg is one of those classic things. I can't imagine anybody writing it. I don't know if you did or if somebody told it to you.
Well, I got the idea from something I read in the paper once. I don't even know what newspaper it was. But I, just got the idea from that and then put it into joke form, changed it around. And
it's terrific.
Out of it.
It's great. I remember another story. I don't know if you have one today because I hate to have you tell these things, and everybody else walks around saying, look what I'm so clever, I came up with this great story. What they don't tell you is that Pete Barbutti told it.
Well, I'm always on the search for the worst joke in the world. They keep, the worst joke in the world is often the funniest, but it's the worst in terms of, like the pig joke, you laugh at it and then you say, oh, that's awful. Everybody has the same reaction to it, but everybody laughs at it. So
yeah.
I'm constantly looking for the worst joke in the world.
I had a guy on one time, he was talking about Red Adair. You know who Red Adair is?
Sure, the guy who puts out the fires.
Yeah, have you heard this one?
Which one?
Maybe I'll tell you a joke. But Red Adair, he goes down to Texas to put out a big fire. And he's killing some time because he's been down there a couple of days, and he's really kind of down in the dumps. He's sitting in the bar, nobody recognizes him. And so finally, this one over-inebriated individual comes over and sits down uninvited at his table and says, how you doing? And Red Adair says, well, fine. He says, I haven't seen you in a long time. Red Adair's starting to feel a little bit better now because he thinks this guy recognizes him. And he says, you really know who I am? The guy says, sure. He says, by the way, how is Ginger Rogers?
Very good.
So, I don't know. You hear these kind of things. I'm not even sure I told that thing right, but
yeah, that's good enough. Yeah.
I get a little nervous, telling a comedian a story like that.
Well, that's all right. That's where most stories come about. Comedians hear a joke, and they take it, and it becomes a seed for another story or another joke, that has the same flavor or the same.
And maybe you work a routine around that or something.
Yeah, that's how it starts.
Yeah. Do you remember? Here, I just thought of one you told, and I'd love to have you tell it if it's still familiar to you. Remember the one about the trumpet player couldn't get a job?
Oh, saxophone player.
A saxophone player?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great story. Kind of a musician-type story, but a great story. It's about a saxophone player who lived in Cleveland and couldn't get any work, so he thought a change of venue would help. Moved to London and got a cold water flat in the third floor. Things were bad for 40 days and 40 nights. It just rained, and no one called him for a job, and he just lay in his bed there and existed on graham crackers for a month. And finally, one day he awakened, and the sun shone through the window brilliantly. And he thought, hey, maybe this is a sign. So he ran to the window and threw open the shutters. A rainbow filled the sky from one horizon to the other, just incredible. He stood there mesmerized by all these beautiful colors for the longest time. And the sun moved ever so slightly and shone from the bell of the saxophone, and he thought, this is truly a sign. This is a new beginning. So he picked up the saxophone and opened the window and began to play the most appropriate song he could think of, the great Harold Arlen song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Ba, 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 ba. He reached the middle part of the song and couldn't remember it. And that had never happened before.
That'd be the bridge, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, and he couldn't remember how it went, and it really bothered him, and especially since a small crowd had gathered below, 23, 24 people, and they shouted encouragement, keep going, lad. So he thought, well, let's start from the beginning, and this time he would surely remember the middle, so he started from the beginning again with the same thing. Ba, 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 ba. And the crowd grew into the hundreds, and they kept shouting encouragement, keep going, lad, but when he got to the middle part, he forgot it again. So he started at the beginning over and over, and the crowd grew into the thousands. And every time he got to the middle, he forgot it, so he would start over again and again, and the crowd grew into the tens of thousands, and it became surly. They began to shout, finish the song, you dummy! And in despair, when he knew that this was the end because it was his only chance, and he had blown it somehow, he took the saxophone and smashed it against the window and threw his worthless body out of the third-story window and crashed to the pavement below, and just as he was expiring, the British ambulance pulled up with the siren going, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Now I've heard that, and I'm laughing again.
Well, there's something wonderful about that, too. Something sick but fatalistic about it.
Yeah, which kind of, maybe that's where comedy is really based, sometimes out of tragedy.
Well, it is, sure. Comedy. Steve Allen said once, good description. He said, comedy is tragedy aged. And it really is after you let it go for a while. Because, when a terrible tragedy happens, nobody does it well. Some weird people do some jokes about it, but the average person doesn't do a joke about it. But
yeah. Well, you just brought up something. Right after the shuttle tragedy, jokes started appearing. Awful jokes.
Well, they do. I think it's kind of like a release. It's your way of saying, if I don't do this, I'll cry. So
yeah.
People, people in general do that. It's like, the classic burlesque jokes about somebody being in a public place and your pants fall down. I mean, we laugh at that and think of that, but if that were to happen to you in reality, that wouldn't be very funny at all at the time. It'd be, extremely embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
difficult to handle emotionally. But
Or if it would have been an individual that you would have really felt sorry for, then certainly you don't get laughter.
Sure. So once it's got some age to it, like a fine wine, it just gets better. And the situation, you can stand back and look at it objectively without the emotion involved to it, and then it becomes funny.
Interesting thing, just this tragedy in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
I'm just waiting now how long it'll be before we start hearing jokes about
It won't be long.
bombing Russia. It'll be easier to find at night or something.
That's right, yeah, it won't be long.
And maybe, this might be a great opportunity for a little détente to happen between the two countries, because
I sure hope so.
yeah, I would think so too. Sometimes comedy can do that too, ease over hard feelings.
I think you'll discover too, if you travel around the world, as I have, comedy in this country is truly an art form. When you hear foreign comics come here, and it's supposedly the best from their country, it really is infantile compared to the comedy in this country, to the way it's put together, to the way the words are used, the shading of the words. I mean, the average comic here in the U.S. would be brilliant somewhere else.
Isn't that something?
Yeah,
So
I think it's because our country is made up of people who've come over here and had to scuffle to make out in the beginning and have had to work their way up the ladder. And I think when you learn to laugh at yourself, then you come to grips with life. Because people who are legally insane can't laugh at themselves. They can't see the humor in things.
Mm-hmm. It is a healthy sign.
Oh, sure it is, sure. Because sometimes all you can do is laugh. I mean, look at the situation in current years we've been alerted to in Biafra and other African countries, Ethiopia, where children are dying and starving to death. And, there's nothing anybody can do to alleviate that tomorrow. We've all gone to the telephone at night when we've seen those shows and called in a pledge of $5 or $10 or something, and we've done what we could, or we've seen a little container on a counter at a 7-Eleven, and we've all put our loose change in there, a couple pennies or something, and we all do what we can, but we know that there is no one who can pick up a pencil or pick up their telephone and tomorrow end that tragedy over there. So all you can do is you do your part, but knowing that exists is a tremendous burden on the human psyche. So I think what you do is you joke about it to put it into perspective and say, well, there's nothing else I can do about it. I've helped with my nickels and dimes, and I've done everything I could there, so now all I can do is laugh about it so that I can live knowing that exists over there.
It's far from a perfect world, and that's why we need comedians, and we need a little night out occasionally.
That's right.
Yeah. In fact, we're going to be giving away a weekend, Friday night getaway to one of our listeners to go up to see you at Pheasant Run.
Well, how nice.
And then overnight accommodations and brunch the next morning, so that's going to be good for somebody.
Well, geez, that sounds like something I'd like to get in on, too.
You're already going to be there.
Yeah, but free brunch.
And by the way, if anybody else wants ticket information, you can call Pheasant Run. It's a one-night thing only. This is what you call a one-nighter. Pheasant Run this Friday night. Call the area code 312-261-7943 to see Pete Barbutti. It's a dinner and a show, and it's going to be a great evening, I can tell.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm looking forward to it very much.
Now that we've talked so seriously, can you tell me one story as just sort of, the closing thing as we say so long?
Well, let me think.
This is really putting a guy on the spot. I
had the audacity one night to tell a terrible joke on The Tonight Show, which I think it was about 14 minutes long. Terrible. What happened? I was doing the show, and they ran into a time situation. They had some real dumb actress on or something in front of me who had absolutely nothing to say, and it just went on and on and on. And they had some sort of deal where they had to give her so much time to get her there. She had absolutely nothing to say, and the show was just doing awful. So they said to me, they said, if you want to spend some time on the panel, just tell one joke and then go over there. So it became like a challenge. I said, okay, I'm just going to tell this one joke. So I went in and I told the joke that just filled a complete segment on The Tonight Show between commercials. And I went over there, and Carson was in tears because he knew what I was doing. Sort of like putting on the producer and everything. And everybody in the band was falling down because they knew it too. Because they all know, on headsets what's happening upstairs. And it was a terrible joke about a guy who was working at a Cadillac agency in East St. Louis, Illinois. And the front door opened up just about an inch and then closed again. And he thought, geez, he said, I didn't think the wind was blowing. This is a few years back when cars weren't selling very well. And he looked down, there was a snail crawling across the floor. And he was sort of hypnotized watching the snail's very slow progress. Took about an hour and a half, and the snail stopped at his feet, and he was just ready to squash it, and the snail looked up and said, "Do you have an El Dorado in stock?" The guy almost had a coronary. I mean, the snail was talking to him, and he said, "Yeah, we have an El Dorado. We have one left." And the snail said, "What do they run?" And the guy said, "About 27,000. And the snail said, "Is that fully equipped?" And he said, "Yeah, that's the way they come." And the snail said, "Well, how about if I wanted some customizing paint, a different paint job?" The guy said, "We could do that. It'd take about 4 days, and it would run you extra." And the snail said, "How much?" And the guy said, "Well, it depends on the paint job." And the snail said, "Well, I want a big letter S on the roof and a large letter S on each one of the doors." And the guy said, "Well, you're talking about maybe an extra 1,500. We're talking about maybe 28.5. And the snail said, "Thank you." So he turned, which took him about 15 minutes, and he left the building. It didn't take him quite as long to leave because he had the floor slickered up pretty good for his first trip. So it was about 3 hours later, the guy was almost in the same spot, and the door opened again an inch and closed. And here came the snail again, towing behind him a small snail wallet. And he crossed the floor again. The guy, once again, absolutely mesmerized by this whole experience. And the snail reached his feet, and he said, "Here you are." And the guy reached down, picked up the wallet, and there was 29.5 and $100 bills crammed in there. And the guy said, "This is the most incredible sale I've ever made." And he said, "I can't understand this." And the snail said, "Well, an uncle of mine, Snail, died and left me some money, and I want to buy this car." And the guy said, "Fine." He says, "You want to tell me about the paint job with the big letter S's on it?" He said, "Well, being a snail is a real low-life, experience. The only thing worse is a slug, and they're just like terminal slime. So the snail is about as low as you can get on the ladder. And now that I have all this money, I want to drive this big car right down the middle of the best part of town and have all those rich people stand out there saying, 'Wow, look at the S car go.'" Now, is that bad or is that bad?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that's bad.
I like it.
Yeah, sure you would. Well, you're a little warped, too.
Pete, it's great to talk to you again.
Thank you, my friend.
Keep up the good work, and
I hope to see you out at Pheasant Run.
boy, I'd love to. I'm working the next morning, so it's impossible for me to catch your act again.
Just follow you back into town and do a show at your station.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Pete Barbutti, all the best to you.
Thank you very much, Ken.